In this video, we're going to demonstrate how you rebuild an XSD or halogen-specific detector by removing and replacing the two main detector elements, the reactor core and the probe assembly. Let's begin. We're going to start by removal of the XSD probe assembly, and there are three flathead screws that hold it into the main housing. Loosen those and the probe assembly will slide right out. I'm then going to tap the top of that to get the screws to drop out of there, since I'm going to use those later in the next assembly. Next, we need to remove the bayonet fitting on the opposite or mounting end of the detector. Loosen this with a wrench and then unscrew with your fingers. To be able to remove the reactor core, we need to loosen the Allen head screws which hold the upper cap in place. We need to take our small Allen wrench and turn those screws in or clockwise so they go past the outer wall of the detector housing. This will move them into the inner part of the cap. Then once they're past that, we'll just rock the cap back and forth with our fingers and our hands until that comes off. Slide the reactor core out of the housing, or if it doesn't want to come on its own, push on the heater connection right there, the black heater connection. Now I can see I had one of my screws that went a little too far, but it went right into a pocket on that. There is also a graphite ferrule that is going to be on the bottom portion of the reactor core. If that's still in the housing, most likely it is, we're going to have to dig that out. If you just wedge your screwdriver into that and then twist the detector housing, that should unthread from there. Next, we're going to take some Q-tips and just clean everything, especially where the graphite ferrule was. We want to clean the housing out so when we reassemble everything, there's no loose graphite or any other debris that's left into there. Here you can see the detector housing is all ready to go. So we are going to grab our next reactor core, pull that out of the box, and start reassembly. So on the top of the reactor core is a new graphite ferrule in the top there. And we're just going to pull this out, and there are some instructions on how to reassemble this. If you want to go and review those, you certainly can. It comes with the reactor core, but that's just going to slide right in like the old one came out of there. And then you're going to put the graphite ferrule on the bottom side where the old one came out of. Of course, the taper is going to go toward the bottom or the end of that assembly, where the bayonet connector is going to fit on. And so once that gets seated in there, I'm just going through and cleaning that up a little bit, making sure there's no graphite left in on the inside of that. And then we're going to put the bayonet connector back on. Making sure the reactor core is well seated into that housing, we're now going to put the cap back on. And I had that one screw that came out of there. So if I put that on the Allen wrench and then screw it in from the outside is the easiest way of doing that. Make sure that's flush so it'll fit past the outer housing, and we're just going to slide that cap in place. You'll want to make sure all the holes line up from the cap and the outer housing so that when we take our Allen wrench and move those screws out into the outer housing, so that's going to be turning counterclockwise, which will secure the cap to the outer housing. Once the cap is secure, we can get the new detector probe and get ready to mount that onto the top of this assembly. Here's the new XSD probe assembly. I'm going to open that up and remove the new detector element. And we're going to grab those. Actually, I'm going to first clean that, just make sure the surface of that ceramic is clean. And we can install that into the detector. And I'm going to grab those three screws we had set aside from the previous assembly. And they may not go down, so you're just going to move that back and forth, tap it a little bit to allow those screws to drop down into their spots, and then we can tighten those screws in place. And if you haven't done it yet, we're going to go and tighten the bayonet connector on the bottom. Tighten that up with a wrench so that stays secure, and that should wrap up the rebuilding of the XSD detector cell.